But I do know that the Gospels, Mark was the first one. It could have been 20 years. It might have been 30 years. Matthew was next. Luke was next. It could have been 20 to 40 years after the events of Jesus' life that these Gospels were written down. Now, I want to illustrate what might take place here. Ruth and I may be visiting with a couple, and Ruth begins to tell a story about our son when he was 5 years old. He's now 54. And she's telling about his birthday party, and I say, no, Ruth, that wasn't Peter, that was Jim. Well, when you do that, Ruth says she always makes, I make her feel like she's dumb or stupid or lying or doing something like that. No, that's not my intent at all. My intent is, because I'm right, that I should correct her. Well, we've learned over the years, and not perfectly, because there's still once in a while something like that's happened and we try to correct each other. You know, how many of you have had that experience? You're telling something and somebody else wants to tell the story differently? Well, I've come to the conclusion that the writers of the gospel were just like that. And that's why we have different points of view. Is one right or wrong? Not necessarily. The truth of the passage is what's trying to be told, not the details of it, and yet the details in Mark as well as the other gospel are important, and I want to show you some of the important things that happens today. It's going to be more like a Bible study than a sermon today, because I just feel like sometimes we need some help. When I know I do from time to time. I can't just read a passage of Scripture and just let it be. I got to stop and think about it, meditate on it. What's going on? What's he saying? What's happening here? What's the positive? What's the negative? These kinds of things. And sometimes I grab a commentary and I start reading, and I can spend a whole day just thinking about that particular passage. But I'd like to have you, if you would, bear with me today and open up your bulletin to the 7th page and look at that long scripture lesson. I'm going to try to summarize it kind of quick here, if I possibly can without doing too much. Mark's gospel is the shortest, and Jesus is always on the run. He's always doing something immediately. Even in the first sentence, it doesn't say that, but it's the implied that when Jesus crossed again in the boat to the other side, immediately a crowd gathered around him. That's Mark. The other Gospels don't have Jesus in this great big hurry. And the ruler of the synagogue, he is probably at least a well-respected person in the community, probably somewhat wealthy in that sense. So you contrast him with the widow, or the woman. I guess she doesn't say she was a widow, who had spent all of her money. A contrast to the rich and the poor. If you stop and think about what took place in this story, very much a contrast. Jairus is named. The woman is never named in any of the Gospels. That is a way of saying that you could check it out with him. He's a Jewish leader, a ruler of a synagogue. He comes and he falls at Jesus' feet. What does the woman do when she has to come back and tell Jesus? She also falls at Jesus' feet. These similarities that take place. And yet the people are very different. For Jairus, a leader of the Jewish community, to fall at the feet of Jesus around a crowd, he had to have given up a lot of his dignity a lot of his prestige, a lot of his honor. Why would he do that? His little girl was more important than who he was and his position and his money and anything else that was important. His little girl was more important, his daughter. And yet Jesus addresses this woman who has come to him as also a daughter. To me, these things, she didn't have anything to offer. Jairus probably could have paid Jesus to come. This woman had nothing to give. And he says there in the 23rd verse, "Come and lay your hands on her." What did the woman do? She reached out and touched the hem or the corner or something of the garment, and different gospels explain that differently. Some say the tassels. I don't know if you're familiar, but a lot of Jewish men would wear tassels on their cloak around the edge of the, and some would say those were the religious significance of the robe or the cloak that they were wearing. And so she was touching the religious part of it, and I think it's Matthew, the Jewish, who writes for the Jews, says tassel in that one. And so when they leave the house and go, or the beach, and follow Jairus, there's a great crowd around. And then when Jesus has healed the woman, and they leave the woman and they go on toward Jairus' house, he doesn't let the crowd go. He says, "Stop. You guys stay here." Why? Why doesn't Jesus want the crowd to go with him to the house of Jairus? They've witnessed the one miracle. Why not show more miracle? But he stops the crowd and tells them not to come along. Well, both of the little girl and the woman have problems. 12-year-old girl, and she's had issues for 12 years. We don't know whether the little girl has had issues for 12 years. Has she been one who has been sick most of that time, and now she's at this point of death? There's an implication in some of that with this particular story. You stop and look at it. And both of them, if they would lay hands on or touch, both of them declare they would be made well. Jairus believes that when Jesus would come and touch his daughter, she would be made well. And the woman believes that if she can touch his garment, she will be made well. Both of them are taking a risk. Both of them are stepping out to do something that probably in the culture shouldn't have happened. The Jewish leader, Jairus, shouldn't have probably gone to Jesus out of his position. And out of her uncleanness, with a flow of blood, she's always unclean. She should never have been in the crowd. If the crowd had witnessed her before she got Jesus' touch, she could have been ostracized. She could have been stoned. She risked an awfully lot of her life to get to Jesus. And Jairus does somewhat the same thing. He risks a lot of his to be there. Well, he says to the daughter, the girl, the woman, excuse me, "Daughter, your faith," that's in verse 34, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." Somebody's telephone. Okay, as long as I thought maybe there was a band outside and we were missing the 4th of July. It had already come. Okay, now, has been made well. And he says to her, "Go in peace." That's a blessing. That's go in shalom. Shalom is wellness and wholeness and prosperity and multiple blessings. That's what shalom means.